The Rings of Power is back on.
What is it?
I've made it through only one of the new episodes, and things are frankly weird already, because exactly why do people making the Rings of Power want it to be Breaking Bad? What's the thinking? Oh, Sauron is going to be like Walter White, Tony Soprano and the Joker this season, huh? And there was me foolishly thinking he was maybe going to be like Sauron. And that rang a bell because the recent Star Wars series The Acolyte showrunner wanted that to be like Breaking Bad as well, instead of, well, like Star Wars. Now, maybe I'm alone, but I kind of liked what they were. I don't want everything to be like Breaking Bad. Is this more of that subverting expectations I keep on hearing about? Call me odd, but I kind of want The Lord of the Rings to be The Lord of the Rings, not Breaking Bad. And why do shows keep on trying to make the bad guys into thirst traps? Something very weird is going on and I don't understand or like it. I did not sanction this. We have the Acolyte trying to ship the Sith Lord Kimia, and now we have the Rings of Power trying to ship Sauron and Galadriel. Is it Reylos again? The people that wanted a relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren in Star Wars, despite him being an evil Sith Lord. The people making these shows seem to find something very alluring about evil characters, and it makes me kind of uncomfortable. And why is this show on a 6.9 out of 10 on IMDb? That's a very generous rating, and I'm totally sure it has absolutely nothing to do with IMDb being owned by Amazon, who also make this series. So where did everything finish up last season? Well, Galadriel had found out that Halbrand was actually Sauron in disguise in a twist so predictable I called it weeks before it happened. So Sauron had left on foot and just appeared back in Mordor a scene later on the other side of the continent, and then bafflingly, Galadriel didn't tell any of the other elves that their greatest nemesis had been living and working among them. Gandalf and one of the Hobbit things had gone on a journey to Rhûn because he wanted to find a constellation in the sky. Not sure how that works, because constellations in our night sky tend to, well, they move. But fine, maybe they don't on Middle-earth. The Númenóreans had all gone home to their island, and the elves had forged 3 rings to fight the affliction affecting their people. And that's what Galadriel is in trouble for in this episode, not telling anybody that Halbrand was really Sauron. So in this episode, Elrond runs to the Elves' King with the rings to snitch on Galadriel for not telling anybody in the city of Eregion that Halbrand was really Sauron. And in doing so, Elrond didn't tell anybody in Eregion, including Celebrimbor, that Halbrand was really Sauron. Makes perfect sense, huh? The thing Elrond is damning her for, he did the exact same thing. Elrond is worried that Sauron made the 3 rings as some sort of trap, so he disobeys a direct order from the king and then jumps off a cliff with the rings to stop the king from using them. He goes to one of the elves' elders, Círdan the Shipwright, who is one of the only good things in this episode for me, because he's being played by the actor Ben Daniels, and he's a really capable actor. You may know him from the 2005 Doom movie with The Rock and Carl Urban. This is a $1 billion series, and it's about time they got some capable actors, unlike the lady playing Disa, who before this $1 billion series had only ever acted in a few things before, and it was mostly on UK children's TV. She played a pirate on a game show for kids called Swashbuckle.
No, sorry, Cook, I really can't sing you a song. Anyway, my guitar Sheila fell in the slops,
Surprise! It's Sheila, the slightly sloppy guitar.
Elrond wants Círdan to dunk the rings in the sea, but then Círdan just brings the rings back to the king anyway, rendering the whole section of the plot pointless. It's just going round in circles, and Elrond was wrong anyway, because the rings seemed to save the elves. Speaking of which, last season Sauron ran away from the orcs and left Mordor to go to Eregion, helped make these 3 rings, then got found out as being the big bad guy by the elves because he was being really obvious about it, then walked back to Mordor, then gets captured off camera by the orcs who beat him up. Gets tortured, then convinces the leader of the orcs, Adar, who thinks he's the king of the Southlands, that he's on their side, and tells them Galadriel is in Eregion with a sorcerer working on a way to stop the orcs, and he describes the sorcerer as being like Sauron. The orcs then let him go, and he walks back to Eregion again. He's just going around in circles. and I've genuinely no idea what his plan is, or what his thinking is even supposed to be. He got found out as being the big bad guy of the series, had to run away, so why does he now think it's safe to go back to the elven city of Eregion exactly? Galadriel and Elrond are not there, and they didn't tell anyone he was Sauron, but the problem is that Sauron doesn't know any of that. Galadriel even told the leader of Eregion, Celebrimbor, not to see Halbrand again.
Galadriel, where is Halbrand?
He's gone, and I doubt he will return. And should he ever, none of us are to treat with him again.
What?
But he lets him in anyway for reasons. Season 2 then starts with a flashback to earlier in the story, just after Morgoth had been defeated. So it's a prelude. Morgoth was one of the Valar, so kind of a god in the writings of Tolkien. So one of his followers, Sauron, is trying to take over after Morgoth's defeat and destruction. And Sauron is standing there, trying to make a pitch to some orcs about why they should follow him. And he's giving a very flowery speech, talking about his vision for the future.
Morgoth is gone, leaving us alone and disgraced. But today, a new age begins.
To a bunch of orcs, and he looks like a pretty elf. And the speech is frankly ridiculous. Because orcs in The Lord of the Rings, let's face it, are a pretty savage lot. They're not exactly big thinkers. They're not going to be won over by pretty rhetoric. They respect strength, and that's about it. And Sauron should know all of this. The orcs are ruled by strength.
Many orcs will die.
And this policy, the many of you orcs will die if you join me policy, yeah, it turns out that's not very popular with the orcs. Whoever would have guessed? Also, it turns out that the orcs, the creatures who thrive in and love chaos, aren't that keen on fighting to bring about a new order for Sauron.
No longer will we be hunted as the demons who broke Middle-earth, but rather worship as the saviors who finally healed it.
What would make Sauron think that the orcs have any interest in being saviours? They like eating people.
Doubt me at your peril.
Doubt me at your peril. Why have they made Sauron so camp? This is Sauron in a former incarnation. When he becomes Halbrand, why does his accent change?
That way lies death, friend.
And that is my path.
Stop asking questions, shut up and enjoy the content. Why would an orc care what men think of him? Men to orcs are food. One of the orcs then tries to attack Sauron, and Sauron butchers him in front of all of the other orcs. How? How are they still this far off from Lord of the Rings? Whoever wrote this just doesn't get it at all. Why is Sauron trying to hold a coronation for himself? Why would orcs respect the idea of a coronation, or a rite of succession, or ceremony? Their leaders just tend to be the biggest and most violent orc. So Sauron gets down on one knee to have an ornate crown put on his head, but instead Adar, the father of the orcs, stabs him in the back with it, and the orcs, including their father Adar, then attack Sauron and tear him apart. But if Sauron's plan at this point was to make the rings and mind control people and become powerful, why did he need the orcs anyway? But this is not the end for Sauron. He instead flows through the floor as a black ooze and ends up in a cave absorbing rats and centipedes before splatting down a hillside like a bag of offal. I watched this with other people, and I have to agree with one of them when they said this scene was really like Hellraiser. And by now, any and all menace that Sauron had as a character is just long gone. That splat is Sauron, the Lord of Darkness, just before he gets tangled in the wheels of a passing wagon. Sauron absorbs the woman in the wagon and becomes Halbrand, and his accent changes, for reasons. He then meets some human survivors of the now rampaging orcs, and the survivors are Southlanders. Hang on, where is Sauron supposed to be now? Sauron goes with the refugees. Why? I've no idea. This is how he ends up shipwrecked on a raft in the middle of the ocean. He gets on a boat with them off camera. The boat gets sunk by a sea monster while they're trying to get to somewhere safe across the ocean. I have no idea how much time is supposed to have passed or where anyone is. The series still has no feel of either space or time. The makers of the Rings of Power have seemingly learnt nothing, literally nothing from season 1's failure. But now I have a better idea of where Sauron has been in his story. So he started out here with his coronation and getting stabbed a lot, went on foot maybe several hundred miles south because he ran into refugees from the Southlands. Then he went to sea, met Galadriel and went to the island of Numenor. Then he goes back to the Southlands and to Mordor, gets injured, goes to Eregion. They find out that he's Sauron, then he goes back to Mordor on foot again, gets captured by the orcs, then goes back to Eregion again to go back to the same group of elves that found out he was the Lord of all evil last season. Meanwhile, Gandalf is on his way to a place called Rhûn, travelling with the hobbit creature Nori, the female Frodo one. I'm not sure if that is where Gandalf came from in the first place in this story, but maybe we'll find out at some point, and this may come as a shock, but him and Nori get lost and end up going around in circles.
No, it can't be. Stone trees. We're going in circles.
Every character and plotline in the Rings of Power is now going around in circles. Maybe this is actually genius, but I doubt it. The storylines are now all the same shape as the rings are. And there is a shocking lack of character development in this show. They're being tracked by someone in a weird mask, and they're also being followed by another hobbit thing, Poppy, the female Samwise, but at least she had the wit to bring a map with her. Every character in this thing is written as a bona fide idiot. Then Nori and Gandalf blow up a tree, have a feast of live beetles, and everyone breaks into song. So, how is The Rings of Power Season 2? For me, it's much the same as Season 1.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.